If you're preparing for the OET writing test, it's possible that you're making a critical mistake. In this video, I will explain what that mistake is, why it's a problem, and exactly what you can do to avoid making this mistake and losing those all-important marks. So, one of the biggest mistakes that OET candidates make in the writing test is including too much information and unnecessary detail. And this is costing you valuable marks in the conciseness and clarity criterion. The assessors don't want every single detail in your letter. They're looking for clear, relevant, and focused writing. Now, to really understand exactly what's expected of you in the writing test, let's take a close look at the description for the conciseness and clarity criterion. So looking then at these bullet points for conciseness and clarity, the assessment criteria states that it considers irrelevant information. So this is talking about what the reader doesn't need to know. And it's also considering how effectively the case is summarized, meaning that there is an awareness of the audience and no time is wasted. Now let's look in a little bit more detail at the actual description for this criterion. So it says here that health professionals value concise and clear communication. So it's very important that you use your knowledge and experience as a healthcare professional to think about how your reader wants these case notes to be communicated to them. So it's saying here that the criterion considers whether unnecessary information from the notes is included and how distracting this may be to the reader. Just think, if you're including every single detail from the case notes, it probably will be quite distracting for the reader because they won't know what to focus on. And it's also looking at how well the information is summarized and how clearly the summary is presented to the reader. So we're focusing on what the reader doesn't need to know and making sure this information is left out entirely, and with the information that we have chosen to include, how clearly is it summarized? So what exactly are the consequences of writing too much in your OET letter? Well, apart from losing marks, as we said earlier, it makes it very confusing for the reader. Just think, if you're writing to another healthcare professional, they probably don't have a lot of time. They need to be able to look at your letter and immediately see why you're writing, and then be able to extract the important information and understand exactly what this patient needs. So time is very important in a healthcare setting. So the purpose of this writing test is to ensure that you can select and communicate information in a clear and concise manner. Now, we've talked about why this is important, but how can you make sure that you're doing this in your OET writing test? How can you ensure that you are getting a high score in that conciseness and clarity criterion? Let's take a look at an example task and talk you through the steps you need to take. Here is a writing task taken from some nursing case notes. So the first thing we're going to do is look at who we're writing to and what type of letter this will be. We can see that this is a discharge letter, so our purpose is to discharge the patient, and our recipient, the person we're writing to, is the resident community nurse at a community retirement home. And another important detail is that the letter is accompanying the patient back to the retirement home upon his discharge tomorrow. Now let's talk about how we can interpret this information. It's important to note here that the task states that the letter is accompanying the patient back to a retirement home. If you look in the case notes, you'll most likely find information stating that this patient is already a resident of the nursing home. But why is that important? Well, it is important because it means that your reader will already know the patient. That means they will already have certain information about their medical and social history. Therefore, you will not need to include this information in your letter. So as a general rule, if you can see that you are writing to someone who already knows the patient, someone who's previously treated them or has a relationship with them, there's certain information in the case notes that just will not be necessary. On the other hand, if your reader does not know the patient, you'll need to consider exactly which parts of the medical history are important. It might be relevant to include all of the details in the case notes, in which case that's fine. But you always need to ask yourself the question, What does this reader actually need to know? What am I going to ask them to do? What information do they need in order to do this? Now, once you've selected the information for your letter, the next thing you need to do after going through the case notes and selecting this information is to spend some time planning your letter. Decide how many paragraphs you're going to include and which information will go in each paragraph. Let's take a look at an example plan for these case notes. You're always going to start with the introduction, which will address the purpose, your reason for writing, which in this case is to discharge the patient who was admitted for pneumonia. Now you can see in my plan, I'm going to include 1, 2, 3 body paragraphs, and each paragraph has a very clear focus. We have symptoms on presentation in the first one, we have the patient's current status in paragraph 2, and then in paragraph 3, we've got our recommendations and requests. So it's important not only to select the relevant information, but also to present it in a logical way. And you can see from this plan that my letter is going to be very focused and very clear. So to summarize, the content of your letter really matters. Do not try to include every single detail, as this will really negatively affect your marks. Instead, start by looking at the task. Ask yourself, who is the reader? What is my reason for writing? And what information does this reader need to know in order to continue treating the patient? Use your medical knowledge to make these decisions as you go through the case notes. What information would you want to have if you were treating this patient? The next stage of getting a high score in this assessment criterion is going to be how you present the information, making sure your sentences are clear and concise and the letter is logical. If you're feeling a bit unsure about the OET writing test and you're looking for more help and support, then I recommend that you check out this video next, as it walks you through a nice, easy to follow 4-step guide for OET letter writing success.